Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this exclusive interview. Now, Ukraine is facing new uncertainty as the United States freezes nearly all new foreign aid, affecting critical civilian programs that support reconstructions, veterans, education, and infrastructure. President Zelenskyy has vowed to fill some funding gaps with state resources, but questions remain about how sustainable that will be. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy has also accused Vladimir Putin of fearing peace and prolonging the war. How will these developments shape Ukraine's future? Joining us today on TVP World to discuss is Bohdan Nahaylo, the editor-in-chief of The Key Post. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Pleasure to be back.
So we are looking down at this foreign aid freeze, and of course, the big question is, how is that going to affect Ukraine? How substantial is the freeze, actually?
Well, it seems very bad. It's a surprise, not a surprise after the election, but a surprise given the context of the last 3 years in the war. Look, the aid that's been coming from the US is very important. It ranges from hospitals, helping AIDS victims, to, for example, supporting a free press and supporting some of the independent publications in Ukraine. But it's not the end of the world. What is worrying is what will Trump do next? First, this cut in international aid affects not only Ukraine, it's worldwide. So there's a lot of fear and shock elsewhere, I'm sure in this country too, in Poland. But let's remember that there are other humanitarian agencies active, particularly in Ukraine, like UNHCR or others, the UN. The worry is, given his attitude, Trump's, towards the UN, will he also cut funding for the major humanitarian organizations and NGOs that really have an impact in war-torn Ukraine? Zelenskyy is in a very difficult position. He wants to play up to Trump because he doesn't want to lose the flow of arms. He can live for the time being with the cutting of US aid, as opposed to all aid, and hope that perhaps with other countries pitching up, some of those gaps can be met. But he can't afford to take Trump on and criticize him for this, because at the end of the day, the big factor is getting the arms and continuing the fight and not having Ukraine abandoned in some kind of compromise deal which suits the Kremlin.
Right, and we do know that money is fungible. If some of Ukraine's allies are also experiencing the same type of cut, will that then restrain their ability to be able to also kind of fill in the gap for Ukraine?
I think it will, but it's also the latest wake-up call. We have them every month almost, don't we, during the last few years. And it's a question of prioritization. What is important? What does Ukraine desperately need to stand its ground, not to be overrun by the Russians, and at least the support to negotiate a fair peace, right? Other things can perhaps wait. European countries, the US and others are doing a great deal already. Poland, for example, by taking in Ukrainian refugees, by their support programs that aren't in Ukraine but help the cause. So I think that at the end of the day, if Europe responds responsively to what Trump is doing, which comes from an internal matter, from internal priorities, but has these global repercussions, I think that might even work out for the better eventually, assuming that Trump can pull out a rabbit out of the hat and get Putin to negotiate in a way that doesn't sell Ukraine down the drain and, in other words, sell Europe down the drain.
Right. You also mentioned that this is perhaps less worrying than the broader attitude that Donald Trump might have when looking at this war. Is there a worry that this is perhaps just the trend first to come before even more aid, even something like military aid is being pulled out?
Well, I think the redeeming factor for Ukraine and any critics of Trump so far is that he hasn't stopped the arms flow as yet. we're waiting to see what kind of negotiations might be put in place by his aides, Kellogg and others. So we don't know. I mean, their fingers are crossed. But on the other hand, Ukrainians and others know that Trump made promises before the elections. He has to win over 55% or 52% of or whoever of the American population by saying, look, I'm delivering. What actually happens in the next few months when harsh realities also hit Trump, global and domestic opposition, he may then start, fine-tuning the very drastic steps that he's already taken, with the, for example, wanting to throw out illegal immigrants or his statements about the Panama Canal and all of that. So I think smart Ukrainians up, at least we hope in the foreign ministry and in the presidential circles, realize that there's far more to it than just Ukraine. Right. The average citizen, of course, is very tired of the war, has probably lost relatives, houses, buildings, and is very concerned about what does this mean? Where are we going? Yeah. Is there no light at the end of the tunnel? There is light, but patience is called for.
Right. Speaking of light at the end of the tunnel and patience, of course, these assets, these are being described as frozen, not completely halted. So is there a world in which after the audit that they've been talking extensively about will result in at least a big chunk of these aids continue to flow? Or do you think that the audit in and of itself is perhaps an excuse to start cutting these fundings?
The audit is an excuse, of course. But remember, we had, a 10th-month delay under Biden because of the blockage in Congress. It's not the first time that there's been a significant blockage or delay in delivering. But on the other hand, if Trump and Brussels agreed that the seized assets of the Russians, billions, can be used to fill the gap in the meantime, that could be the face saver.
Right. That might actually be a better solution going forward. Now, in the meantime, Zelenskyy is looking for some way to alleviate some of the stress. And one of the things that he described is using the government funding, public funding. But well, how realistic is it, given that Ukraine already has some ongoing financial pressure due to obvious reasons, like the war?
Well, let's be frank. And Ukrainians know that, Zelenskyy knows that. Ukraine is putting up a heroic struggle. But it's not generating money, income itself. It's reliant almost totally on its friends to support Ukraine financially, economically, whatever. So I think there is a belief that at least for the foreseeable future, Ukraine's other friends who are providing substantial amounts from Poland to the Baltic states to Denmark, France, etc. There are also unforeseen factors. It's not all about the US. The US is the biggest player here. What will happen in Germany in a few weeks' time when we have the election there? Will this be a game changer in Europe? Will there be this tandem of Germany and France still? What role will Britain play in between these two? What shape will Europe take? We've got Poland now as with the presidency, running the presidency of the EU. And with the support of other Central European countries and Eastern European countries, is that going to make a difference? A shift of power, at least in terms of influence within Europe, whilst some of the major players are paralyzed by elections, the far right coming to the fore, etc.
Right, so it does seem like everything is so intricately connected that this move is going to have a very significant impact. Going forward, Zelenskyy also accused Vladimir Putin of fearing peace and wanting to prolong the war. Do you think at the current state of affair, in light of everything that is happening, who has a better kind of negotiating position at this time, and how do you think that will develop going forward? Is there any way that the Western allies, be it United States, be it the rest of the European Union, can help Ukraine bolster its position going forward?
Well, let's not take Zelenskyy's statement out of context. There is this toing and froing constantly. Moscow's trying to project its narratives. Ukraine is trying to defend its position and project its own position. So Zelensky's latest statement is simply a response to Putin saying that, who are we going to talk to? Zelensky is not a legitimate president. Forgetting there's a war, there's martial law. You don't hold elections during martial law, especially when 20% of your country is occupied and millions of your people are outside the country as refugees. So it's nonsense. But some people who are not informed, and perhaps some within the new White House setup, might fall for that. So obviously, Zelensky is coming back to that. I think what's important is what Trump and his closest circle feel. Do they feel that Moscow is in any way receptive to a new administration, or is it playing hardball and not being receptive? I think that Trump has been very disappointed by the sort of treatment and responses from Moscow. On the first day of his inauguration, Russian TV showed nude pictures of his wife. Was that a friendly gesture, or was it reminding him perhaps that, we may have some other dirt on you? And then, sort of the criticism that has come, maybe not from Putin himself, but from his closest circles, does not suggest that they are willing to sit down and say, okay, you're a friend of Volodya's, Donald, you two work it out. And I think that Trump and his immediate circle have felt that frustration in the last few weeks, and hence we're getting the other kind of modified, tempered responses from Washington that weren't there 2 months ago.
Right. Well, now the Kremlin is constantly changing its tune on how they want to engage with Donald Trump. On one hand, like you mentioned, they're trying to poke the bear. On the other, there's also talks about, hey, we want to be friends. What's their game here?
Their game is to remain in a dominant position in that part of the world. They talk about a multipolar world, but essentially now China's a factor, but they would like to think that it was still a bipolar world. The Cold War was still on, and they're acting as if the Cold War is on. China's a major player here, because what did Trump do? On the eve of his inauguration, on the Tuesday, on the Friday, he telephoned the Chinese leader and invited him to attend. Unprecedented, right? How did Moscow respond to this behind closed doors? And the fact that Xi, the Chinese leader, agreed that his deputy would go. I mean, there was very little about that in the press, but the signals being sent is Russia also feels the squeeze. If there is some kind of even mini rapprochement between Beijing and Washington, they are the losers. They will be left out. And I'm sure China doesn't want to see Ukraine totally destroyed. It was, it was a major trading partner. It was a major corridor for its trade through Odessa, etc. So, the game is going on many levels.
Yeah, and thank you so much for helping us unpack all of that and give us a clearer picture of what is the stage here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.